On the morning of November 8th, 2023, Shepherdsville, Kentucky, was waking up to another quiet day. The small Bullitt County community, known more for its open skies and low-slung houses than for violence, was a kind of place where people still left their keys in the ignition and waved to their neighbors. Just after sunrise, that calm cracked apart with a single phone call. A woman's panicked voice came through dispatch. Her neighbor had just collapsed in the driveway. She said the woman had been pounding on her door moments earlier, incoherent, shaking, and covered in what looked like blood. Police and paramedics raced toward the address on Bentwood Drive. When first responders arrived, they found Tiffanie Lucas, 32 years old, lying on the ground in front of her single-story home. She was conscious but barely responsive, muttering words the officers couldn't piece together. One paramedic later said she seemed vacant, like she wasn't inside her own body. Inside the house, officers followed a narrow hallway to a bedroom whose door stood open. The quiet was unbearable. Two small boys were on the floor. Maurice Baker Jr., 6, and Jaden Howard, 9, both suffering from gunshot wounds. A .40 caliber handgun lay near the foot of a bed still scattered with toys. The scene was painfully domestic. Comic books, half-stacked laundry, a light left on from the night before. Emergency crews rushed the boys to Norton Children's Hospital in nearby Louisville. Both were pronounced dead not long after arrival. Investigators sealed off the home. Every indicator, the lack of forced entry, the placement of the weapon, the trajectory of the bullets, pointed to an act committed from within. News of the double homicide spread through Shepherdsville within hours. Parents pulled their own children close. The notion that something like this could happen here felt impossible. Neighbors told reporters later that Lucas had seemed normal enough, a single mother who worked odd jobs and kept mostly to herself. She sometimes waved from her porch as the school bus rolled by. The older boy was described as bright, polite, the kind of kid who always held the door open. The younger was playful, attached to his mother, never seen far from her side. No one could reconcile those memories with the reality that unfolded that morning. The first reports identified the scene simply as a domestic shooting. It wasn't until later that evening that officials confirmed both victims were Lucas's own children. The announcement landed like a second tragedy. Shepherdsville's local police chief, hardened by decades of work, called it the most heartbreaking call I've ever answered. Behind police tape, forensic teams photographed shell casings and fingerprints, documenting a space that had transformed from home to evidence. By nightfall, the small Kentucky house glowed under harsh floodlights, the reflection flickering off children's drawings still taped to the refrigerator. What began as a 911 call for help had become a story of two lost lives, and a question no one could yet answer. Why would a mother do this to her sons? In the hours after the scene was secured, investigators began to rebuild the final minutes before the shootings. The front door showed no damage. Windows were locked from the inside. A neighbor reported hearing two sharp pops between 7:40 and 7:50 a.m., followed by silence. Another saw Lucas stumble outside minutes later, barefoot, whispering something about an accident. Crime scene analysts mapped the interior. The living room was tidy. The kitchen table held a laptop, a half-finished cereal bowl, and two school permission slips that had never been signed. Down the hallway, the boys' share bedroom was small but colorful. Posters of superheroes, a few stuffed animals, a homework sheet pinned to a corkboard. Near the closet was a spent shell casing. The gun was registered to Lucas. Autopsy results would later show both children were shot at close range. There were no defensive wounds, no evidence of a fight. For investigators, that detail implied the boys probably never saw it coming. As they cataloged the home, detectives also noted several unsettling details. Handwritten notes referencing control and frequencies, a phone charger unplugged mid-wall, and a laptop still powered onto a Facebook login screen. The device would later become central to Lucas's own explanation of what happened. In initial questioning, she told officers the shooting was an accident, then changed her story. She said she believed she had been manipulated through her Wi-Fi, that voices and signals had been invading her thoughts. Officers recorded her statement verbatim. When they asked who she thought had harmed her, she allegedly pointed upward and said, "They did it through the internet. Detectives ordered a forensic analysis of her electronics. Nothing unusual was found. No remote access, no malware, no outside interference. Investigators began to suspect an emerging mental health crisis rather than a digital conspiracy. By afternoon, the Bullitt County Sheriff's Office announced her arrest on 2 counts of murder. Reporters captured her being led from the hospital in restraints, her hospital gown replaced by jail scrubs. When asked for comment, she said softly, it was supposed to be different. The coroner released the children's names that evening. Vigils began almost immediately. Teachers, neighbors, and family gathered at the local elementary school, lighting candles along the fence line. Someone placed 2 small backpacks beside the gate. Each bore a tag with their initials. The image of those backpacks would appear on newscasts across the state. Symbols of innocence lost in a place that rarely made national headlines. The public wanted answers, but the early investigation offered little clarity. Lucas had no significant criminal history. Friends described her as quiet, private, occasionally anxious but loving toward her children. She had shared custody disputes in the past, but no documented abuse complaints. In the weeks following her arrest, attorneys began preparing a mental health defense. Court filings show the defense notified prosecutors of their intent to claim mental disease or defect. Lucas underwent psychiatric evaluations at the Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center in LaGrange. Portions of the report later released indicated delusional thinking centered around technology and control. Investigators also discovered recent internet activity suggesting growing paranoia. Searches about electromagnetic frequencies, mind control through Wi-Fi, and spiritual cleansing rituals. She had posted online about feeling watched. Experts consulted by local media noted that such delusions can accompany schizophrenia or acute psychosis, conditions that distort perception of reality and self. Family members told reporters they had seen signs of deterioration, but didn't anticipate violence. One relative said she'd been talking about evil energy and isolating herself. A friend recalled she once disconnected her router because she believed signals were poisoning the house. For prosecutors, however, the evidence was straightforward. 2 children were dead, and their mother had admitted pulling the trigger. Theories about unseen manipulation couldn't undo the physical proof found in the bedroom. In legal terms, Kentucky's standard for insanity requires that a defendant be unable to appreciate the criminality of their conduct. The prosecution contended Lucas knew right from wrong. She called for help afterward and attempted to describe events as an accident. The contrast between those legal arguments and the raw human dimension widened as months passed. Mental health advocates used the case to highlight gaps in early intervention and stigma around treatment. For others, the details only deepened the horror. A mother convinced she was fighting an invisible force, turning her fear inward. By early 2024, the question of motive had fractured into 2 parallel truths, one grounded in legal accountability, the other in psychological tragedy. Throughout 2024, hearings were repeatedly postponed while doctors assessed Lucas's competency to stand trial. Each delay reopened wounds for relatives of the victims, who attended every court date clutching photos of the boys. In September 2024, defense counsel formally filed a notice of intent to present evidence of mental illness. But scarcely a month later, without warning, Lucas withdrew the motion and chose to plead guilty. On October 23, 2024, in Bullitt Circuit Court, she admitted to 2 counts of murder. There was no plea bargain, no reduced charge, no insanity defense. The courtroom fell silent as she said, "Guilty." Legal analysts later speculated that the move may have stemmed from exhaustion or remorse. Prosecutors confirmed that the plea was entered voluntarily after consultation with counsel and medical staff. The decision spared the community a full trial that might have relived every graphic detail of the crime, but also left many unanswered questions about motive and mental state. Court documents show she declined to give a formal allocution beyond acknowledging responsibility. The judge set sentencing for late November. Meanwhile, the county prepared victim impact hearings, allowing relatives to speak before the final judgment. Media coverage turned from investigation to introspection. How could someone living in a quiet neighborhood, without a violent history, reach such a breaking point? Editorials questioned the adequacy of mental health resources in small Kentucky counties. Past acquaintances described a woman drifting into fear, yet none could reconcile that with the decisive, irreversible act she had taken. By the time sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was filled beyond capacity. Reporters lined the hallway, and deputies escorted grieving families through side entrances. Everyone there understood that no verdict could restore what had been lost, but closure, even painful closure, was necessary. On November 22nd, 2024, Judge Rodney Burress convened the final hearing. Lucas entered in a gray jumpsuit, wrists shackled. She faced the families of Maurice Baker Jr. and Jaden Howard for the first time since her arrest. The prosecution described the killings as deliberate and unprovoked, emphasizing the absence of drugs, alcohol, or external coercion. They argued that the children's final moments reflected complete trust. Defense counsel spoke briefly, citing Lucas's psychiatric diagnoses and requesting that the court recognize her illness while still accepting her plea. Then came the victims' families. Morris's father addressed the court through tears. "You took my heart, my best friend, my reason to live." A grandmother said that every morning she still set 2 plates at the table before remembering they were gone. Their words filled the courtroom with the human scale of law statistics never capture. When Judge Burress delivered the sentence, 2 life terms in prison, he called a crime the ultimate betrayal of motherhood. He said, "Those boys looked to you for protection. What they received was the unimaginable." Lucas remained mostly motionless, head bowed. She spoke only once. "I'm sorry. I can't change it." As deputies led her away, murmurs swept the courtroom. Some family members applauded through tears. Others sat in stunned silence. Outside, the sheriff addressed reporters, saying the case had left every officer who responded that morning changed forever. He added that the town's officers would carry the memory of those boys for the rest of their lives. Within hours, the sentencing clips circulated nationwide. The story of the Kentucky mother who blamed Wi-Fi became shorthand for the intersection of delusion and violence in the digital age. Yet locals resisted sensationalism. To them, it wasn't about technology or headlines. It was about 2 children whose lives had ended in the place they should have been safest. Today, the small neighborhood in Shepherdsville has returned to its slow rhythm, but reminders remain. The Lucas house was eventually sold, repainted, its windows replaced. Some neighbors still cross the street rather than walk past it. Others leave flowers near the mailbox each November. Memorials for Maurice and Jaden continue each year at their school. Teachers recall their laughter, the way they competed over math games, the drawings they left behind on the classroom wall. Local organizations created a small scholarship fund in their names, aimed at supporting mental health education in Bullitt County schools. Forensic and court records close the legal chapter, but emotionally the case lingers. Mental health professionals cite it when discussing the critical gap between early symptoms and crisis intervention. Social workers reference it in training on risk assessment. Each statistic traces back to 2 names that will never grow older. In interviews from prison, Lucas has not provided further explanation. She maintains fragments of the same beliefs about digital manipulation, but also expresses regret. Experts note that remorse and delusion can coexist, a painful truth in many cases of psychotic violence. The legacy of the crime is a mixture of sorrow and awareness. It forced Kentucky's small-town residents to confront issues once considered distant: the fragility of mental stability, the dangers of untreated paranoia, the limits of neighborly intuition. It reminded even law enforcement that the most ordinary settings can hide extraordinary tragedy. At the cemetery south of Shepherdsville, 2 headstones sit side by side beneath a young maple tree planted after their funeral. Visitors often leave small toy cars, crayons, and folded notes. The epitaphs read simply, "Beloved sons, always remembered." No headline, no courtroom statement, and no sentence can fully articulate what was lost inside that house. But the facts, the morning call, the investigation, the confession, the verdict, stand as permanent record. They tell the story not of mystery or spectacle, but of consequence, the price paid when fear eclipses reality. And in that truth lies the final echo of Shepherdsville's quiet streets, forever changed by one morning in November,